if Alex Pereira wins, they're for sure as hell not going to give Uncle Live a rematch. They're risk losing again. So Pereira will get a rematch. Uncle Live won't.
You better believe it. You're exactly right. You know how this game works. Welcome back. It is episode 117 of the MMA Outsiders. My name is Zain Bando. To my right is Anthony Balester, filling in for Pat Danna. Thank you again for joining us today. It's a little bit of a later release. We apologize for that. It's not our traditional Tuesday drop. This is coming out on Thursday night, the day before the UFC 313 weigh-in. So we apologize for the delay, but thank you so much for bearing with us. Before we get started into everything, though, just wanted to remind you all to please be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. It would help us out a ton. You can do so by going to youtube.com/EDB Network to find out more. And of course, you can also listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, and so much more. It's all right there. You could literally be doing anything. You could be sitting at the kitchen table. You could be going on a run. You could be moving from one business meeting to the next. And if you want your combat sports fix this week, you can get it on all sorts of mediums as well. So be sure to stick around for that. And again, for those of you who are listening on the audio only side, be sure to come back over to the video only side too. And just a brief reminder, you'll see this. You'll see this later on in the show, but just wanted to give a small plug that the MMA Outsiders, along with every single show on the network, is presented by Playback. Anthony, it's good to have you here. Thanks again for filling in. Do you want to give, I guess, the viewers or listeners a capsule as to who you are for those who maybe have never seen you before, particularly on this show, or just maybe people who are newer to the network as a whole? Can you kind of just give a little intro to yourself, and then we'll be able to get to things. And thanks for coming on. It's nice to finally have you. I've been looking forward to doing a show with you for a while, and thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me on, Zan. It's definitely an honor to step in on such a great show. I mean, I'm definitely consider myself a huge MMA and UFC fan. Definitely not a casual, but definitely not the experts and follow in depth as you guys are. So I definitely like to lead on you guys, but I'm definitely honored to bring my expertise and my knowledge onto the show. I mean, I've been following UFC my whole life, and I'm definitely a huge fan. And we got some big fights coming up. We also have some huge news outside of UFC as well. So we got a lot of great things to talk about, and I can't wait to break it all down with you.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess that's a perfect segue to get right into everything. So kicking off the show, and of course, this was something that I don't think anybody expected to break at the time that we're recording this. This is only a few hours old, but Dana White is set to enter into the realm of boxing to become a promoter, partnering with the WWE's Nick Khan. His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh. Turki Al-Sheikh probably revealed some information on Pat McAfee earlier this week that he probably shouldn't have. There's apparently a leaked date for their first boxing venture. There really isn't a formal name for this promotion yet, but I just want to talk really briefly of just how lucrative and gigantic this news is. You've got a lot of very powerful people on the other side of the world in a region that, you know, I think the UFC has become accustomed to going to in the last several years, and they're really diving into the boxing business, which is something that Dana has long relented for years in saying that he would never do it unless the right opportunity came about. And it seems like the right opportunity is now. I guess, what did you make of this news? And do you think that do you think that Dana is going to be a suitable partner in this venture? And overall, do you think it'll end up working out in the long term, if you will?
Yeah, I was definitely shocked. I definitely thought, it's been a long time where Dana White's been talking about getting into boxing, and since it hasn't happened, I never thought it would come to fruition. But now that it has happened, when I look at it, I really don't see how it can not be successful. I mean, we see now with Jake Paul and some other guys who have recently gotten into boxing. I mean, the popularity and the demand for boxing is there. You just got to put on the right fights, and you got to have the right people to make people want to watch it. The problem with
Exactly.
boxing for so many years is everybody's pretty much independent contractor to where they have so much control over their fights. They never want to fight the best because they're so worried about their record. You never get the best versus the best. And it's also very confusing for the local casual fan because there's 3 or 4, maybe even 5 belts in some cases for every single weight class. So it's hard to determine like who's the best. Like this guy won the belt. Is he the best in the world? Well, not necessarily because there's 3 other guys who got a belt as well. I think Dana White's going to come in here and kind of basically treat this like he does UFC, where, the fans are going to get the fights that they want to see. The best are going to fight the best. There's going to be one belt, and the guy that has that belt, it's going to be obvious and clear to everybody that that guy is the best in the world. So I absolutely love it. And a lot of people got to remember the whole reason why Dana White was invested in UFC to begin with is because he grew up a huge boxing fan. At the end of the day, he is a huge boxing guy, but he knows just as much as us that boxing has been dead for a while and it needs some changes. And Dana White wants to be the man to do it. And with his track record and the success he had with the UFC, I think he'll have success in boxing as well.
Yeah, I think we'll have success in boxing as well too. The big key is going to be, you know, can he lure some of these big name fighters from some of these other promoters, like a Frank Warren, like a Bob Arum, like an Eddie Hearn? That I think remains to be seen too. But when you have the backing of Al Sheik, when you've got Al Sheik, creating these 4-fight deals for the likes of Canelo Alvarez, when you got these other fights like this one in Times Square where it's only going to be 3 fights, but it's 3 of the biggest fights of the year, topped with Ryan Garcia in the main event. I think it slowly but surely tells you that I think eventually, and I know this is a bold prediction, and I know they've yet to have an event, but I think what's going to happen is it's going to be the same structure as what it was a decade plus ago when they bought out all of those promotions, when they bought out Affliction and Pride and Strikeforce and all of them. I think eventually, if they do it the right way, they're going to become so powerful that all of these governing bodies, the WBC, the WBO, the IBF, in 5-6 years, Anthony, if this is done correctly, I think very similarly to what you said, there's going to be one universal belt, and all of those other federations just won't matter anymore, and it'll eventually just become an all under one roof thing. Where if you want to become a professional boxer, you fight under this TKO umbrella, and that's it. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's definitely going to be a process. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. But like you said, future, years down the line, that's definitely what's going to happen. I mean, you've seen how long it took him to do that with UFC. And then eventually UFC became the most prominent promotion to where if you were any type of MMA guy, you had to strive to be in UFC because that's the only way you're going to get eyeballs on you and the only way you're going to be able to make significant amount of money. But I think he's going to do the same thing with boxing. Obviously now he's going to need the financial backing, which is what he's going to receive because, it's going to be tough to get all these guys on board and it's going to cost a lot of money. But if he's got the guys that are willing to invest, because you got to remember, he's got guys coming into the UFC making like $25,000 a fight. Now, it's not going to be as easy to do that with these boxers who are used to making millions and millions of dollars. So he's going to need a lot of financial backing, which I think now he's going to get that. And I think that's why now is the time he's going to capitalize on this.
Yeah, now I think it's the time he's going to capitalize on this too. And just like one more thing before we wrap this up and move on to another major news story that broke in the hours following this is, I think too, with someone like his vision and with the way he knows how to promote, like knowing what he knows about the business, and I don't know if this is too in the weeds for you, but knowing what he's been able to do with a guy like Callum Walsh, an upstart Irish prospect that no one knew 3 years ago, and now he might be one of the hottest prospects in the sport. If you can build your league around him, essentially, and then it's almost a funnel effect where you can get some of these bigger names in the fold, like a Terrence Crawford, like a Canelo Alvarez, like a Ryan Garcia, and you build these names just based on name value alone, it could be huge. So
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
I'm just saying, I think if you have the power of, well, actually, this was one other question I was going to ask you, because Dana teased it earlier on Pat McAfee. He talked about how they're looking to go with one of the major rights bidders for TV, and as we know, the UFC rights deal is going to be up at the end of the year. Do you think wherever this TKO boxing promotion ends up, TV wise, is going to be the same platform that the UFC ends up on, or do you think they'll completely run separately to where there will be no crossover to where you might have to find multiple channels to see both sports? Because I think, uh, based on the money and based on the resources that they're going to pump into this thing, that I think tons of networks will have interest in wanting to air this, even if they're on like even if they're on non-primetime dates like Friday or Thursday night events. I think there are several different different networks who would want it, and I also think that there are several different streaming services, maybe ones that weren't in the fold previously that could be in the fold now that would be interested. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And you were asking about, is it going to be a package deal or going to be separate? I think they're going to be two separate things. Since boxing and UFC are, two separate, kind of different sports. I think Dana White's going to have them separate, and I think that's a way that he could capitalize on more money instead of packaging them together and kind of giving whatever company that's going to buy it kind of a discount. Why not sell one to one company and one to another and kind of basically double your money? I'm not saying you double your money. He's not going to get nearly as much for the boxing as he would for the UFC, but I think he'd make more money in the long run having them separate than having them together.
For sure, and I guess with that being said, which network, if you were to predict, do you think ends up picking up the TKO boxing league, and why? What do you think?
I mean, it's definitely tough to say, but I got a gut feeling it's going to be Netflix. I feel like Netflix has been doing whatever they can to get into the live sports world, and I think UFC and Dana White and Netflix seems like for some reason I got a gut feeling that that could be a good pairing.
Yeah, that it definitely seems that way as well, but it all remains to be seen as this is flowing news in the coming weeks and months. But let's move on now to the other big story, this time over in the MMA realm, because Dana White went on First Take earlier Wednesday and revealed some very promising news that it appears that Jon Jones will be coming back to the UFC this summer, which can only mean one of two things. Number one, it probably means he'll be coming back to International Fight Week June 28th. And number two, he'll either be fighting Tom Espinal, Alex Pereira, or nobody. So what do you think?
It's definitely a step in the right direction to potentially finally get in this Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall fight. He said he's going to fight in the summer. I know that's kind of what they've been predicting all along, that they're going to try to get that fight done for International Fight Week. But now with the way Tom Aspinall's talking, he says he's trying to get a contract negotiated with Jon Jones, but he's just waiting on Jon. And if he can't get Jon, he's going to fight somebody else. But it wouldn't make sense because you can't really have Tom Aspinall fight somebody and Jon Jones fight somebody because they both want to fight for the undisputed title. And I know as much as he wants to fight Alex Pereira, I feel like it has to be Tom Aspinall. And we'll talk more about Alex Pereira's fight because Alex Pereira's got a very, very tough challenge ahead of him and Ankalaev this weekend. And he's got to get through that first and before he even thinks about Jon Jones. So in my opinion, I feel like it has to be Tom Aspinall. And I think that's the fight to make. I know a lot of people are saying Jon Jones is ducking him. I think what it is Jon Jones knows that that's the scariest opponent. He's young, he's hungry, and that's the toughest matchup for him. Whether, I think Jon Jones thinks he can beat him, but Jon Jones is going to want to get paid for it. And to take that risk to fight Tom Aspinall, a young, athletic heavyweight like that, he's going to want to get paid so much money, it's not going to matter whether he wins or loses. So I think he's using this as a negotiation tactic. And ultimately, I think it's going to be him versus Tom Aspinall International Fight Week. But what are your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a purist, and I've been following the UFC long enough to where I've been heartbroken too many times. So I'll briefly explain. Like, I was one of those people when I was 9 years old that was clamoring for Brock Lesnar to fight Fedor. I feel like me and tons of other people wanted to see it. We never got it. And then a couple years ago, there was the huge talk of, oh, could Jon Jones fight Francis? And of course, we all know what happened. Francis ended up leaving the UFC. He was on the outs with them. His contract wasn't renewed or whatever. I'm just going to be blunt with you here, okay? If the UFC misses out on this fight after years of teasing super fight after undisputed title fight over and over and over again, and we can't get this fight, it will be a colossal failure. Because if you look at the remainder of the heavyweight division, there's not a single guy in the division besides Tom Aspinall that has any remote chance to beat Jon Jones. And if Tom Aspinall, God forbid, ends up fighting Cyril Gane, the Jones only beat in a minute, it'll be a literal travesty. is the two best fighters in the world won't be fighting each other in the prime of their careers for the heavyweight title. It'll be a guy that should be fighting the best in the world against a guy who's already 0-1 in heavyweight title fights. It would make no sense at all. This fight has to happen at all costs. Otherwise, I think the MMA community is going to literally. Hey, there might be people that quit watching the sport if this fight it doesn't happen. You think that Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler was big a couple of years ago? This is on a whole astronomically different level, my friend. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with the fumble of the Brock Lesnar and Fedor fight, I mean, till this day, Dana White says that was the one super fight that he most regrets not being able to get done. Well, you couldn't also get the Francis and Jon Jones fight, but he can make up for all that if he could finally figure out a way to put this fight together. And like I said, Zain, if he doesn't put this fight together, and none of it really makes sense, because if you schedule Alex Pereira and Jon Jones, then you're going to sit there and be like, oh, you know what, Tom? I know you're, the interim belt. You defended it. You did all these great things, but we're going to strip you and let Jon Jones defend the undisputed belt against Alex Pereira. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I feel like these two guys have to fight first. Now, if Jon Jones goes out there and beats Tom Aspinall, and then he wants to fight Alex Pereira in a big super fight, then go ahead.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like you said, this has to be the fight to make, and it's definitely the fight I want to see. Obviously Jon Jones is the GOAT. He's been the champion for so long. He's beat so many Hall of Famers and world champions, and he's definitely the GOAT. I mean, it's hard to argue against him.
It's true,
but Tom Aspinall is probably the first guy in my lifetime where I actually sit there and think to myself, hey, this guy actually might be able to beat Jon Jones. I never thought that about any other UFC fighter until Tom Aspinall.
I would agree. And just another thing to piggyback off that, we're recording this on March 5th. This releases on March 6th. So I'm going to put you on the spot. March 6th, 2025 is when this comes out. When do you think, or what literal timetable should we be looking at here to potentially get an announcement or no announcement at all in regards to this lingering heavyweight title fight, which everybody is dying to know about? What do you think?
I'm gonna say probably like the end of April, because that would give it about 2 months before the fight would be scheduled to fight. It's supposed to be International Fight Week's going to be at the end of June. So if you look at the end of April, that's about 2 months in between. That's enough time to promote the fight. It gives you about another 4 to 6 weeks to kind of figure everything out. So my prediction would be we figured out the answer to this at the end of April.
Yeah, I kind of hit the prediction as well, and I guess one final thing we can briefly discuss. If these two were to fight, who is your early lean? Who are you picking?
Like I said, I know Tom Aspinall is the first guy I think that could beat Jon Jones, but I can't pick against Jon Jones. I mean, he's too well diverse between the grappling skills and the striking. He's just too rounded, and I know Tom Aspinall was a real big 265 explosive fighter who's young. But until someone beats Jon Jones, I can't pick against the GOAT.
Yeah, I can't pick against Jones either. And one other small PSA, because the fight hasn't been announced yet, if you are planning to go to Las Vegas for an International Fight Week, book your rooms as soon as possible, because as someone who went to McGregor Poirier 3 a couple years ago, those room prices were astronomical. So if you even have the smallest inkling of going to Las Vegas, take care of those travel plans now before the smoke clears, because let me tell you what, Anthony, if the UFC can get this fight done, it will be MMA's version of the Super Bowl, and it won't be even close. It'll be great. That is one fight. If I were to tease one fight that I really hope to make this year, it's that fight for sure. So
let me say one thing, Zan, before we move on. I think there's two huge fights the UFC can make. It's Aspinall and Jones. Would you rather see Aspinall or Jones, or would you rather see Islam versus Topuria?
And you're only saying I can only pick one? Is that what you're saying? Jones, easily. I mean, he's the number one guy of all time. A lot of people consider him as the GOAT. I think the Makhachev-Topuria fight could happen in 2026 or 2027, and people wouldn't be disappointed. So,
I definitely agree, and I always side with the bigger boys. I mean, the heavyweight champion is the baddest man on the planet, so Jon Jones and Aspinall would decide that.
That's true. Well, let's move on. Let's stick with the UFC train, though. This past weekend's card at the Apex was actually kind of fun. Main event was a huge flyweight fight. Manel Kape ends the 17-fight unbeaten streak of Suan Adebayev in a very, very anticlimactic third-round TKO, which again, for the second weekend in a row, we have 2 UFC main events now that garnered a lot of layers of controversy. What did you think of this fight?
Yeah, I don't think this one was nearly as controversial. I know some people may disagree with that. But yeah, obviously, Alma Abayev definitely got eye poked and definitely looked like an early stoppage. I know Manel Cape was hitting him, and Alma Abayev tried to call timeout. The referee let the fight continue, and then Manel Cape just kept hitting him with strikes. And then ultimately, it looked like Alma Abayev looked to go for a takedown, and then the referee called it. And I don't understand. I mean, the guy's defending himself. He's going for a takedown. I mean, I know he was running away from him, which I know when you run away from your opponent, it doesn't look too good. But the reason why he was running away from him is because he couldn't see out of his one eye. So I definitely think it was an early stoppage. I think he should have got the timeout. He definitely clearly got the eye poke. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not going to say it's too controversial because Manel Cobb looked like the better fighter up until that point. He was more accurate with his strikes. He was very sharp. And I feel like even if the eye poke didn't happen or if that fight were to continue, I feel like Manel Cobb was going to come out on top anyways. Like I said, he looked like the better fighter. Alma Bayev's the guy who's been on the rise, but Manel Cobb's been here for a while. He's a veteran of the game, and he's just on the cusp of a future title shot. So I think he would have won the fight either way, but it's definitely unfortunate for a guy who was on such a tremendous winning streak in Alma Bayev.
Yeah, 100%. And man, that's very well said. And I actually was wrong on this when I took Almabayev to win his fight, just given that his winning streak was crazy. It dates back to like 2018 or something. But I think Kopp now has proved his worth. I think he was in a very similar situation to Bilal Muhammad, where he got passed over for a title shot a couple of times. And I thought his parting message to Hunter Campbell and the matchmakers was very, very apparent because, and you probably know this just as much as anyone. I mean, you got Pantoja who just beat who just won his last fight in December against Kai Asakura, was making his UFC debut, and now he's going to fight Kai Kara France. If he can beat Kai Kara France, there really aren't too many flyweights left for him to fight outside of Kopp. So, do you think that's the direction the UFC goes? Do you think the winner of KKF and Pantoja gets Kopp later this year? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I know people were saying, "Oh, Kopp's got to be next." And I'm glad you brought up Kai Kara France. Kai Kara France has to be the next title opportunity. I mean, he's earned it. He's the most deserving right now. The fight to make is Pantoja and Kai Kara France. But outside of Kai Kara France, like you said, if Pantoja beats him, there's really nobody else out there. I mean, you're not going to get another title shot to Moreno after Pantoja's beat him so many times. You're not going to give it to Brandon Royval. You know, he already beat Steve Verseg. He already beat Kai Oscara. You know, Muhammad Makayev is no longer in the UFC. So
yeah, they won't give it to and a good point too. They're not going to give it they're not going to give it to Perez and all the other guys you just said. They've already had their chance. You're right.
And the flyweight division is not a stacked division. I mean, that's why you're getting guys making their UFC debuts, getting title shots, because Pantoja has already almost ran through the whole division. I mean, we're getting to a point where Pantoja might have to start thinking moving up in a weight class.
I know, which would actually be very intriguing and would give some very unique opportunities to the bantamweight division, a division that I think has kind of remained stagnant ever since Marab won the belt over O'Malley. But that's also another topic for another time. And speaking of that's a fight that the UFC appears to be targeting as well. So if they can target that for the summer UFC calendar is going to be busy, assuming everybody stays healthy. So
oh yeah,
it'll be fun. Let's move away briefly from the UFC. We'll come back to it in a little bit. Wanted to go through some of these PFL roster announcements. So we have a couple of them. We got the heavyweight division now. We've got the middleweight division, and we also have the light heavyweight division as well. So I guess let's just go through these and let's start with middleweight here. As we know, the PFL is in a world tournament form, and now it's no longer the regular season and postseason, which I actually think is a lot better, and it makes it way less confusing. That's one of the things about the old PFL model I never understood was the point system. I've always been a purist fight fan, You probably have two. Like, I think if you win, you should advance. If you lose, you should be eliminated. This, this is the way I think the promotion needs to be run, and I'm glad that they made this switch. Let's take a look at the middleweight roster, though. We have a couple of interesting names. We've got Impa Kasagan, who's won and the has a couple of championships. I'm pretty sure it's two out of the last three at white heavyweight. We've got Ramazanov. We've got a couple of different Bellator veterans. And sure, back when Bellator was the thing, we got Fabian Edwards, Dalton Rostas, Sabah C, who's been in the PFL a long time. Mike Shipman, who's still working his way up. Aaron Jeffrey, who's been a name to watch for a while, and Josh Silva. So that's the middleweight roster. What do you think of those names? Do you think this middleweight roster is solid? Do you see a potential favorite here? I see a pretty obvious one, but I wanted to get your take first before I gave mine.
Yeah, I'm glad that they finally got a 185 weight class now in the PFL. That's usually been one of the better weight classes in the UFC, so I was surprised that they didn't have it the last few years, so I'm glad that they got that. A couple of names that stick out, Fabian Edwards. I've always been a fan of him. I like his style. But I think my favorite would be Kasanganay. I mean, the guy's been a runner-up just last year for light heavyweight, and I think he is a good middleweight as well. He's going to drop in weight. I don't think that weight cut's going to affect him. In fact, I think it'll make him an even better fighter, and he'll even be tougher to beat at middleweight. So right now, I would favor towards Kasanganay.
Yeah, I like him too, and I think there are some other names that could cause problems. I think if Rasta could get on a run, you could see him in the semifinals. Depending on who he draws, the entire bracket has not been fleshed out yet. But I think that there are some interesting names to look out for, and I actually think a dark horse pick here, and someone that I don't think gets enough credit is Aaron Jeffrey. I think it's another situation where Jeffrey gets the right draws early on in this tournament. He might be able to make some noise and pull off a couple of upsets, but you can never count out C, considering that his striking is absolutely lethal. So you never know. So that's middleweight. Though we're gonna move over now to light heavyweight. We're just gonna go in order of eight classes. I forgot to mention too that the beginning of this tournament is going to be taking place next month in Florida for a 4-week stretch. So for those of you who are looking for your PFL fix, there you go. Let's take a look at the light heavyweight roster now. Some names you might know from another three-letter promotion, if you will. We got Phil Davis, UFC veteran, Rob Wilkins, and longtime UFC veteran. We got Carl Moore, who's been around the block for a while, was formerly at Bellator. Marcelo Nunes, Antonio Carlos Jr., who's always been around. Simeon Powell's on this roster. Carl Albrechtsen, and of course Sullivan Colley, and then of course the two alternates. We got Alex Polizzi, who's always interesting, and a guy who I don't think is getting a lot of publicity, and Rafael Xavier out of Germany. What do you think of this roster?
Yeah, I think it's pretty talented. I like Rob Wilkinson. He's been a talented guy who's been around for a while. I know he was suspended, but now he's back, and I think he could be a guy who could potentially win that division.
Yeah, I think he could potentially win in that division. You could never count out a guy who wrestled at Penn State. So if you got Phil Davis in the right style of training camp, you never know, right? So
oh yeah.
Yeah, and then of course looking over at the heavyweight division, this I think got the most controversy because there were a couple of names left out that they could have put in. But in any event, here is the roster. We've got Valentin Moldavsky, we've got Alexander Romanov, who just recently signed with the PFL. He was with the UFC for a very long time, and then after him we got Oleg Popov, Linton Fasel, which I actually know some info about those two, but I can't fully say anything yet, so I got to hold my tongue on that. Sergey Bolensteiny, and then of course Tim Johnson, and then this other guy. I think he's from the Mina series, but I can't quote myself on that. Puya Romani, and of course Abraham Balby from England. So we got 13-4, 18-3, 19-2, 25-10, 13-3, 18-11, and we got a 5-1 prospect, and then 2 4-0 prospects. I gotta be honest with you. I think it could have done a little better with this heavyweight roster. I think it's missing some key star power among the likes of Ryan Bader and a couple others. But what do you think?
Yeah, Ryan Bader would have been awesome. I'm glad that you brought him up. I mean, he would have been a perfect fit for this. I love Romanov, the guy who was just recently in the UFC. I think he could do some damage in this division, and I also like Popov. He did really good as well last year and impressed me. So I like those two guys heading into this.
Yeah, and if you were to have an early prediction as to who wins this division, who would you say?
I'd probably side with the new guy that's coming over from UFC, Romanov.
Yeah, I would say so too. I could see Romanov, Moldavsky, Popov, or Vassell winning this. I think a big wild card and someone who would need a lot to go right is Tim Johnson. And I think for some of these other guys, the 4-0 guys that I mentioned and the 5-1 guys, um, this is no disrespect. It's simply due to lack of experience. If they can win one fight, it'll probably end up being a good year for them. But crazier things have happened in this tournament style formats. You just never know. Figured we would give a little intel on that. Just wanted to butt in here really quick to remind you guys the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback. For those of you who don't know what Playback is, without further ado, here we go. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together, and of course, you can do so by joining our community going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. And with that, we will get back to the show. Let's go back over now to the UFC, though. We have an update to the Henry Cejudo Song Yadong fight. Um, Cejudo actually wants former bantamweight champion Peter Yan, which would be very enticing, to say the least, if the Song Yadong fight doesn't come together. Dana White has been very vocal in saying that the Song Yadong rematch won't happen, which leads me to believe that now that Cejudo is saying this, the UFC he's probably going to pull the trigger and make the Yan fight. And I think what would end up being a title eliminator fight. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for legacy purposes, to see these two former champions fight each other. I mean, this is a fight that fight fans have wanted to see for a long time. I mean, these guys are two of the all-time greats. They were both former champions in the same weight class, and they never got to fight each other. And Peter Yan, though, I don't like this fight for Peter Yan. I don't feel like beating Cejudo gets Peter Yan any closer to a title shot, because I feel like at this point it's kind of a downgrade for Peter Yan. I feel like where Peter Yan's at, in my opinion, he should either be fighting Merab for the title or he should be fighting Umar Nurmagomedov in a number one contenders match. I
I
feel like
agree.
Cejudo only gets him probably maybe one fight closer to a number one contenders match, whereas I think he should already be there. Like I said, it would be great to see these two guys fight, two legends of the game. But like I said, I think Yan should be fighting someone better than Henry Cejudo at this point of his career, because I think Cejudo's over the hill and past his prime.
Yeah, you could argue that Cejudo's over the hill and past his prime, though. But when you look at his record and when you look at his former double champ status, I can understand why Cejudo wants a name like Peter Yan. Because they're two former champions, and they know that if either of them lose, they're probably done. So I actually am going to go on the contrary to you and say that I think whatever decision the UFC decides to make is only going to benefit the bantamweight division, because it's going to add that much more parity, especially for all the people that don't think Cejudo has it anymore. Very very similar to you. So I think it all remains to be seen there. Let's move over briefly one more time to the boxing side of things. We had a huge WBA title fight this past weekend. Tank Davis fought Lamont Roach, and of course, everyone wants to talk about the round 9 kneel down from Tank Davis. Should it have been ruled a knockdown? Per the rules, it should have, and it looks like the commission is gonna review this to figure out what exactly happened, because we were talking off the air that if the commission had gotten this one right, that it actually would have been awarded a decision win for Lamont Roach. So I think there's a lot of factors at play here. What I think needs to happen is the commission needs to review it. But regardless of what decision they make, in my opinion, Anthony, the most logical thing that you could possibly do is have a rematch between these two. I like it's simply owed to the fans. It's owed to the people who bought the fight. It's owed to the people who weren't thinking that there was going to be an anticlimactic ending to it, and it's also owed to the people who think that maybe Lamont Roach got a little bit lucky, and maybe Lamont Roach caught Tank Davis at 65-70%. So I think overall, regardless of what the commission decides to do, it needs to be priority number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way until Sunday or whatever. Is this rematch needs to happen no matter what, because I think it is owed to Lamont Roach to give him a proper ending, win or lose, just to settle this thing and give boxing a peace of mind that the right guy won. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. The rematch definitely has to happen. The only thing is, at the end of the day, if they do a rematch, I feel like it's not going to go the same way. I feel
I don't
like
think
Tank
so
Davis
either.
underestimated his opponent. I feel like Tank Davis did not prepare like he normally did. That was not the same Tank Davis that we saw highly prepared against Ryan Garcia. This was a
No.
Tank Davis that I thought was just going to easily come in there, be able to go through the motions, collect a check, and be able to add another victory to his record. Now it didn't go that way because Roach came to fight. But now I
He
feel like
did.
if you do a rematch, now you're going to get the elite Tank Davis that you saw against Ryan Garcia, and he's going to go out there and destroy Roach and win the fight, and then Roach doesn't get that victory back. And I know Tank Davis was like, "Oh, I had grease in my hair. I was just trying to get the towel." At the end of the day, the rules are the rules, and it should have been a clear knockdown, which would have gave the majority decision to Roach. So I just think it's unfortunate. It's really not something that you could get back. And now with Tank Davis not looking so good, we just saw a year ago where Devin Haney didn't look good against Ryan Garcia. Maybe after all this, maybe Shakur Stevenson really is the best guy in these weight classes.
Yeah, you never know. And obviously, that's a fight that a lot of people want to see is the Shakur Stevenson Tank Davis fight, which now, I don't know if you've noticed, but the narrative is starting to shift where people think, I've seen literally that people think that Shakur Stevenson, based on how Tank Davis looked last weekend, could run through Tank Davis, which if you would have told me that 2 years ago, I don't know if I would have believed it.
I agree.
So I mean, piggybacking off of what you just said, what ultimately do you think that the New York State Athletic Commission is going to do? Number one, because I actually think they're going to do the due diligence correctly and say that we made a horrible mistake. And I don't know if they'll overturn the decision, but and I do think they'll at least acknowledge because I just think in so many words without like putting it literally, I think there's, and you probably know this too. I feel like there's so much political just maneuver in boxing that's currently going on right now that if they were to somehow give Roach the win in an overturned ruling, that there will still be the people that will still complain and say that them overturning the rule was wrong. That's how cuckoo some boxing pundits and fans are. So I think that's number one. But I do think they will put in a stipulation that because of their issue, with the whole controversy, that I actually do think that they will attempt to mandate a rematch, and I actually think that a rematch will get done. What do you think?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, though, it's a lose-lose. You can't win either side you pick. I think the commission will announce that they made a mistake. It should have been a knockdown, and that Roach should have won. They won't overturn it, and then they'll have a rematch. Like I said, I don't think that justifies the robbery that happened to Roach. But at the end of the day, I think that's the only card that the commission could play.
I think so too, and I think that's a good place to segue. Let's move back over to the UFC now. It looks like we have a little bit of clarity in the middleweight division. So it looks like this unofficial four-man tournament is coming together, and it looks like we potentially know one side. What I'm referring to is the possibility that, of course, Hamza Chimaev could be fighting Dricus du Plessis for the middleweight title, which means we need more clarity on the other side in the contender realm. And now we're potentially getting it. Two former middleweight champions, Robert Whittaker and Sean Strickland. Robert Whittaker is calling to fight Sean Strickland. I think this is the fight to make because this is a crossroads fight. If Whittaker loses this one, he probably isn't getting another crack at a title shot. And if Strickland loses this fight, it's what could have been, and he may think to either retire or maybe move up a weight class because he'll probably realize he can't compete with the best at 185 anymore. I think this is the direction the UFC goes, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the middleweight, I mean, you got a bunch of veterans who are still very, very skilled, and you got some young up and coming contenders. Three in particular. You got Hamzat, who's definitely next. Hamzat and DDP is the fight to make. Hamzat's definitely proven his worth and how dominant he is. And after his win over Robert Whittaker, you got to give it to him. And then you got Imavov, who's coming off of a TKO over Israel Adesanya. And then you got Kyle Bohayo. I think now you have Hamza fight for the title. You have Imavov and Kyle Bohayo in a number one contenders match. And you have some of these other guys who have been around for a while fight each other. Now, I would like to see Strickland and Izzy maybe rematch. But now
Hang on,
with
I'm going to stop
Izzy,
you. All right, hang on, I'm going to stop you right there because all those names you mentioned were good, and maybe you'll get to this in a second. But then, with that being said, with you trying to lay this all out, what do you do with Jared Cannonier then?
well, then Jared Cannonier is going to have to fight a young guy on the come up again. I mean, the guy's fought a lot of guys, but he's lost a lot of fights, and he's kind of on the older side. And I think he's a guy who's going to need multiple fights to kind of get his name back into that recognition. I know he had a decent fight and won his last match, but I think he's going to need another win. Like I said, I think the other guys are just above. I mean, if you want to do Cannonier against Israel Adesanya again, but I'm not sure that's a fight that the fans are going to really want to pay to see.
I don't think
Robert
so
Whittaker
either.
and Strickland's a fight that the fans are going to want to see, or Strickland and Izzy rematch. Like I said, I would like to see the Strickland and Izzy rematch, but I think the Whittaker and Sean Strickland makes more sense because those are two guys who are former champions, and we never got to see them fight each other. And stylistically, that's a really interesting match to watch.
It is because it is because both are extremely well rounded, but Strickland seems to me like he's really kind of changed his style to where he was a wrestler at one point and now he's a striker. And then if you look at the Whittaker side of things, it it seems like his overall game has improved leaps and bounds too. So I really think very similarly to what Dana said a couple weeks ago that the UFC is a very good problem to have at middleweight, and I think whichever direction they decide to go is a good one. But in terms of fresh matchups and matchups that we've never seen before, this is the fight. So, but the big question is going to be because I have some inklings on the UFC's upcoming schedule. I just don't know if Whittaker is really down to do May. I just simply don't know what card you would put it on, and that would make logical sense. So I would actually guess that this fight takes place sometime in the summer, and I actually think that a perfect place to do it would be when the UFC goes back to Australia in August. That's been officially announced as well. That's a UFC fight night card, and these two, meaning Whittaker and Strickland, could easily headline that for sure as one of the biggest international fight night cards of the year. But that also remains to be seen as well. Let's move on though. We had some interesting breaking news within the last week or so. Another added fight announcement for UFC 314. We got John Silva, rising contender, is going to be taking on Bryce Mitchell. He gets his wish. He gets his call out. It's a late addition to UFC 314. I think a lot of people are eagerly anticipating potentially Mitchell losing after the very controversial things he said outside of the octagon, to put it very lightly. I think this was a genius move by the UFC to make this fight. They know that John Silva can make the weight. They know that Bryce Mitchell really doesn't like waiting around. I think the build up to this fight is going to be better than the fight itself. What do you think?
Yeah, I can't wait to see this. I love Gene Silva. I mean, watching that guy, I mean, he's just so accurate and just dices up all his opponents with accurate strikes. And I mean, the guy is so exciting. I mean, he's also entertaining while he's doing it. I mean, he'll punch you in the mouth and then shake your hand during the fight. I mean, the guy is fun to watch. And I like his attitude. I mean, he doesn't fear anybody. He takes on all challengers. And I mean, he called out Bryce Mitchell, and he wants to give Bryce Mitchell payback for those comments he made. And he wants to be the guy to do it. And, he definitely deserves a ranked fighter. So I think this, kind of kills two birds with one stone. And Bryce Mitchell, a guy who was just, knocked out not that long ago against Josh Emmett, I think might be being put unconscious again. I think Gene Silva is going to go in there, and I think he's going to put his lights out. And that's going to be two
Really?
vicious KOs for Bryce Mitchell. And I'm not going to say it's going to end his UFC career, but I wouldn't be surprised that Gene Silva, pretty much puts an end to Bryce Mitchell's UFC career.
So are you saying that this knockout is going to go very similarly to the first time Dan Henderson fought Michael Bisping, and everybody wanted to see Henderson beat him, and he did?
Oh yeah, once he knocks him down, Gene Silva, who's usually a nice guy, he'll sit there and say, "Hey ref, this guy's not getting up." He's not going to show no mercy. He's going to knock the guy down. He's going to jump right on Bryce Mitchell, just like Dan Henderson did, and give him another shot.
Very, very interesting. And Anthony, if your prediction comes true, I think the internet on the night of April 12th is going to spread like absolute wildfire if that happens. That's going to be I'm going to go ahead and say it. If your prediction comes true, it's not only going to be the most viral clip in all of MMA, that might be one of the most viral clips in sports for the entire year. So,
people are going to be making clips. They're going to cut out. They're going to have Bryce Mitchell's comments, and then right when that ends, you're going to be seeing him getting KO'd.
Absolutely, very, very well said. We're going to segue briefly into previewing UFC 313 just really quick. We'll get into a full preview in a couple of minutes, but we had to talk about the other elephant in the room, and that is Rafael Fiziev taking a short notice rematch against Justin Gaethje to save the co-main event. It's now going to be 3 rounds instead of 5 rounds. His original opponent, Dan Hooker, had to pull out due to a very unfortunate injury about a week and a half before the fight. This is the UFC stepping up, figuring things out. They have a new co-main event. Do you think this was the right fight for Fiziev? These two haven't fought in a couple of years. I personally think that Justin Gaethje is getting screwed a little bit here. I think you just lost to Max Holloway. I feel like he should be in a bigger fight than this, but given the cards that the UFC was dealt, and considering that the Dan Hooker fight fell out, the UFC had to do what they could. I personally think that this is a good fight. I just feel like though it's going to be too short notice for Fiziev. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the UFC always does the best job they can of making something out of nothing. I think their hands were tied, and there wasn't really that many options. And yeah, I know it sucks for Justin Gaethje, who should be a win or two away from being talked about fighting Islam Makhachev for a title shot. So for him to have to fight Fiziev, it's definitely a downgrade. But like I said, I didn't think he had any other option. The Dan Hooker fight would have been great. That would have been two guys that Dan Hooker's on the rise. He's trying to get a title shot, so that would have been a perfect match to potentially move up Gaethje in for a title talk. But Fiziev was able to take this fight on short notice. It goes to show you that he was just hungry and ready for any opponent. And he finally gets his rematch after what was a very close first fight. But Justin Gaethje is a very scary guy, and I'm not sure Gaethje is the guy you want to take on short notice.
No, I don't think so either. And we'll get to our predictions in this for this fight in just a few minutes. But 2 final topics to go through before we preview UFC 313. The first one being that the FBI wants to get involved with the UFC, and they want to get involved by training FBI professionals in mixed martial arts. I think that this should happen 10, 15 years ago. I'm glad to see that it's potentially happening now. What do you think? I feel like this story spread like wildfire, but the UFC has yet to comment on it, which I find very, very interesting. Just considering, obviously the FBI is more than likely the biggest government entity in the world. So I thought this was super interesting. What did you think?
Yeah, this should have been happening. I mean, cops, risk their lives every day to protect and serve their communities. And I feel like, obviously they're already getting self-defense classes, but what better self-defense can you learn than the baddest men in the world on the planet, and that's UFC fighters. So they should have been doing UFC training.
It's very well said, and trust me, and I don't want to blur the lines and make this a non-sports comment, but I'm just going to say it. I think if more cops knew how to fight, I think the amount of subliminal danger that people would be in would be far less. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely agree. And I think there would be more respect for cops. And they would be able to do a lot more. They'd be able to, shut down situations a lot easier. And they'll be able to use their fist a lot more than having to use tasers and weapons.
Very well, my man. Let's move on now to one more brief topic outside of the UFC. The Italian gangster Danny Sabatello is no longer with Bellator / PFL, whatever you want to call it. He has signed a deal with Ryzen, and given his very, very comedic nature, this could not have been in the perfect new home for Sabatello. I'm very excited to see what he could do. He's just going to be in fun fights moving forward at 2-3 in the morning on New Year's Eve, and it's gonna be a circus more than anything else, and I think he's gonna love it. What do you think?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, guy's coming off of 2 losses and 1 draw in his last 3 fights. So it makes sense. It's unfortunate, that he's got to kind of not say downgrade, but kind of downgrade in promotions. I mean, we all know basically the UFC is like the NBA, and pretty much the PFL has become kind of like the G League. After that, I mean, all these other leagues are kind of bunched up together. So it's unfortunate that he's got a downgrade of promotions, but I do think he'll have success in Rising, and it is a good organization to be in.
It's a good organization to be in for sure. Very well there, and it's nice to know that we're thinking on the same wavelength there. Let's wrap up this. Oh, now though, let's briefly preview UFC 313 from T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Alex Pereira, looks like he's the real kingpin of the UFC these days, always defending his light heavyweight title on a very consistent basis, and we're finally getting the fight. It's Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev, 2.5, 3 years in the making. I cannot wait for this one. Ankalaev has won 11 in a row. Pereira continues to knock everybody out, was losing to Khalil Roundtree in his last fight last October, came back and won that one, and before that, just absolutely steamrolled through Yuri Prochazka and Jamal Hill, respectively. I personally think, and this is just my feeling, and this is no disrespect to Ankalaev, but I think if he becomes the champion, it's bad for the sport because even though his record is very impressive, I've never really been a fan of Ankalaev's fighting style. I think it's really boring. I think he likes to grind you out on the ground a lot, and I just don't think he's as marketable as people think. I know he has a huge fan base overseas and whatnot, but I just feel like this is Pereira's fight to lose. He knows that he has a lot of pressure on him, and I think if he keeps this thing standing, I think it's another signature knockout, and maybe the best knockout of his UFC career to date. So I'm actually going to pick him to win by third round TKO. What do you think?
Yeah, very interesting fight. Styles definitely make fights, and I mean we got a striker versus grappler matchup, and Alex Pereira, who's one of the greatest fighters to ever be in the UFC and to ever be on this planet, 2 division champion, and who has pretty much ran through all these contenders. We've been saying it for a long time now that the nightmare matchup for Alex Pereira is Ankalaev. I mean, he's a Dagestani wrestler, and we know Alex Pereira is not known as this great wrestler. I would say though, these 2 guys are probably 2 of the scariest guys in the UFC. These are 2 mean guys that are just killers and just go out there and just try kill their opponent. And I love that, and it makes it exciting for the fans. I mean, 2 scary guys that don't talk much and don't have to say much. But like I said, stylistically, this is tough for Alex Pereira. And I do want to say, I think he's a better grappler than people want to give him credit for. His takedown defense isn't that bad, and training work over to share over the last few years, he's definitely improved in that aspect. On the flip side, I think Ankalaev has better stand-up game than a lot of people get him credit for. I mean, I know he's a guy who likes to get on the ground and likes to ground and pound you to death, but he has had some knockouts on the feet and has knocked down some skilled strikers in the past. So you got to respect him on his stand-up as well. But ultimately, Ankalaev is going to want to get this on the ground. He's going to want to control Alex Pereira. And like I said, he's going to want to ground and pound him. And like I said, this is going to be a tough matchup for Alex Pereira. And Alex Pereira is my favorite fighter in the UFC. And I'm definitely going to be rooting for him. And I think if he can pull this out, I know as much as people love Islam Makhachev, if Alex Pereira could go out there and beat Ankalaev and basically show that there's nobody in the light heavyweight division that could touch him, I would say, in my opinion, Alex Pereira would become the pound-for-pound king if he wins this fight. The only thing is I don't think he's going to be able to win this fight. Like I said, Ankalaev seems the type like he's been bound to have the title. Everyone's been saying former light heavyweight champion for a long time, and I feel like that's why the UFC has avoided this fight, because they want Alex Pereira to be the champion. He's way more marketable than a guy like Ankalaev, and they know Ankalaev is probably going to win this fight. So I think Ankalaev is going to maul him to death. I think he's going to get this fight on the ground, and I think he's going to win it by decision.
No way. So I'm going to get a little bit more specific with you. So you think he wins by decision, but is it by unanimous decision or split decision? What do you think?
I think he's going to win it by unanimous decision. I think he's going to get this fight on the ground, and I think he's going to be on top of Alex Pereira for most of the fight. I think he's going to get a lot of significant strikes from his ground and pound, so he's going to have more significant strikes by the end of the fight. And I'm going to say he's going to win this fight 3 rounds to 2.
Okay, and are you saying 3 rounds to 2 is in he wins the first 3 rounds and he's up 3-0 and Pereira attempts to rally in 4-5 and loses, or is it a 3-2 where the fight is decently close until the fifth round? What do you think?
I think the second option. I think it's going to be a 3-2. That's very close. Where Ankalaev just kind of basically separates himself in the later championship rounds.
Okay, so we disagree there. I have and still for UFC 313's main event. You have an and new, which leads me to my final question before we move on to the co-main event. Do you think this is one of those fights where the UFC will be desperate enough to where they will do an immediate rematch as quickly as they can? What do you think?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Ankalaev even said that. Ankalaev said, I'm going to go out there and beat Alex Pereira, and then I'm going to beat him again. So even he knows Alex Pereira is so marketable, they're not going to let Ankalaev get the belt and then just walk off and fight somebody else. He's going to get Alex Pereira again, and Alex Pereira will get his rematch. On the flip side, if Alex Pereira wins, they're for sure as hell not going to give Ankalaev a rematch and then risk losing again. So Pereira will get a rematch, Ankalaev won't.
You better believe it. You're exactly right. You know how this game works. you know what's going on. Anyway, let's move on to the final topic of the show. Go main event here just really briefly. Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev number 2. This is a fight from a couple years ago. Gaethje was able to take that by decision at UFC 286. Do you see a similar thing happening here? Because I do. And I think if this was a Fiziev on a full camp, the fight would go differently. But I really, really do like Gaethje in this spot. What do you think?
Yeah, these are going to be a war of two powerful strikers that like to fight to the death. I mean, both these guys go in there and just leave it all in the octagon. The first match was very close. I think after Justin Gaethje taking a long break to recover from that very vicious KO that he took from Max Holloway, I think that's going to benefit him. Also with Fiziev coming off of short notice, taking it on a fight like Justin Gaethje on short notice is not an easy task at all. And I didn't like how Fiziev looked against Gamrot either in the fight after he lost to Justin Gaethje. And I think Gaethje is due for a huge rebound fight. I mean, after getting KO'd by Max Holloway the way he did, I think he's got something to prove. And I think this is going to be a nice matchup that sets up nicely for him to bounce back and put himself in the title talks with Islam Makhachev. And Islam Makhachev wants a new contender at 155, and he doesn't want to fight a guy that's a former featherweight either. So if Justin Gaethje could go out there and win this fight, he's the perfect guy that Islam Makhachev's looking for. So I think Justin Gaethje is going to go in there, and I think he's going to win this much more decisively than the first matchup. And I think Gaethje is going to win this fight by TKO in the second round.
I'm going to go with the TKO as well, but I'm going to go a little later than you. I think it's going to be a third round TKO, but it's going to be a very, very exciting fight. I'm very much looking forward to it. So that's actually going to do it for episode 117 of the MMA Outsiders. We are out of time. Thank you again for joining us. And before we get out of here, just wanted to do a few quick reminders as we like to do on the show. One final reminder, of course, the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback. You guys already know that. Be sure to check out our Substack. That's etbnetwork.substack.com. A lot of fun content coming out there this weekend in the coming weeks as well. So stay tuned there. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe. You can do so youtube.com/ETB Network. And of course, you can listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcast. So for Anthony Balester, I'm Zain Bando. This has been episode 117. Enjoy all of the combat sports this weekend, of course, with the main attraction being UFC 313. We will actually see you next week. It's more of the we're going to be the same pairing again. Well, Pat is away. So until then, we will see you soon. Have a great weekend. And please be sure to enjoy UFC 313. And if you are gambling, please gamble responsibly. And please also remember that our picks could be either very, very wrong or very, very right, because MMA, in my personal opinion, is the toughest sport to predict in the entire landscape of everything. So until then, have a good one, and we'll see you guys soon.
Shama.
Yes, sir, Shama.